Here's a question I ask every client at some point in our work together. Are you building your career intentionally, or are you really just good at saying yes? For most of my clients, I listen for the pause when they hear that question because the honest answer is usually somewhere uncomfortable. They've been saying yes to everything, every opportunity that landed in front of them, and they've been calling it ambition. But ambition and intention are not the same thing. One is energy, the other is direction. And without direction, even the most talented, hardest working professional can spend years accumulating experience that doesn't add up to the next level they're trying to reach. I call this the difference between choosing and chasing. When you're chasing, you're reactive. You take what comes. You say yes because yes feels like progress. You trust that the right opportunities will find you if you keep delivering results. And for a while, sometimes a long while, that works. The performance reviews are strong. The feedback is positive and there's validation. The trajectory feels solid until it isn't. Because at some point in every high performer's career, there's a pivot in expectations. The things that made you excellent at your current level stop being enough to qualify you for the next one. And if you've been chasing, if you've been building reactively rather than deliberately, you can find yourself exceptionally well positioned for a role you've already outgrown and completely unprepared for the one you actually want. That's exactly where my client Angela was 6 months into our engagement. As I mentioned in my previous video, Angela was a client who was an associate general counsel and believed she was being prepared for her boss's role when he retired. In fact, she was not. So she had 14 months to make herself the obvious choice for the general counsel role. And when we sat down to look at her career trajectory, what we found wasn't a performance problem. It was a pattern. Today, we're going to talk about that pattern, what it looks like, why it disproportionately affects high performers, and particularly women who have built their careers on doing excellent work and trusting that the work will speak for itself. And most importantly, what Angela did about it, because she did do something about it and it changed things for her. This is session 2, and it starts with a question Angela had never been asked before. Are you choosing or are you chasing? I'm Christina Holloway. For over 25 years, I've coached senior leaders at organizations like Google, GE, and Spotify to architect their authority and navigate the high-stakes politics of the Fortune 500. On this channel, I show you how to recognize the power plays hiding in plain sight and how to communicate with the presence that demands a seat at the table. And here's the thing. The most common career mistake I see high performers make isn't working too little. It's working without intention. There's a difference between building a career and accumulating one. And knowing which one you're doing right now in your current role is one of the most important things you can figure out. That's what we're doing today. All right, so let's get started. So we're 6 months into our coaching engagement, and Angela had a new frustration, and it was with herself. So tell me if this sounds familiar. She'd been doing everything right. We were using the AI frameworks we built in session 1 to free up her time, staying consistent with her strategic briefs, working on her visibility with key relationships. So she was getting things done, but she also had the feeling she was busy, but not really productive and still not working on important things. So I asked her this question: walk me through the last 3 assignments you took on. Who chose them, you or your boss? And she paused. I always listen for the pause. And then she said, he assigned them, but I assumed he knew what I needed. That assumption, someone else knows what's best for my development, is one of the most expensive ones a professional can make. And it's not a sign of weakness or passivity. It's actually a sign of trust. Angela trusted her boss. She trusted that if she kept delivering excellent results, the right opportunities would find her. And for most of her career, that trust had been rewarded. The performance reviews were strong. The trajectory felt solid. The results spoke for themselves. But there's another side to this. At some point, the skills that made you exceptional at your current level stop being enough to qualify you for the next one. The execution capabilities that earn you every promotion to date start to become table stakes rather than differentiators. And the passive approach to career development, trusting that the right work will find you, starts to work against you in ways that are very difficult to see from the inside. This is what I mean by the half-life of professional skills. Every capability you have has a shelf life. Some skills stay relevant for decades. Others, particularly the execution-heavy, process-driven skills that AI is absorbing faster than most organizations are ready to admit, are losing their value faster than the people who build careers on them realize. And Angela had spent years developing extraordinary legal execution skills, contract analysis, compliance frameworks, risk assessment. She was genuinely exceptional at these things. And the GC role was going to require all of them, yeah, but it was also going to require things she had never been deliberately developed for. How are you going to apply those insights and that expertise? Business strategy fluency, board level presence, the ability to walk into a room of senior leaders and contribute to the direction of the business. Financial literacy that went beyond the legal function, the capacity to develop and lead a team rather than execute alongside one. Nobody had ever sat down with Angela and said, here are the specific capabilities the next level requires, and here is what you need to build between now and then. Not her boss, not HR, and not the leadership team that was evaluating whether she was ready. And Angela, because she was excellent and because she trusted the system, had never asked. That is the chasing pattern in its most common form. A talented, hardworking professional moving fast in a direction nobody had explicitly confirmed was the right one. Accumulating experience rather than building capability. Saying yes to everything and calling it growth. I also wanted to name something here that I think is important and that doesn't get said clearly enough in career development conversations. The pattern disproportionately affects women. This isn't because women are less strategic or less ambitious. No. But because women, particularly women who've built their careers in demanding results-oriented environments, have often been conditioned to believe that excellent work speaks for itself. Clients tell me this regularly, but I did it too, that if you keep your head down, deliver results, and don't make waves, the right people will notice and the right opportunities will follow. Sometimes they do. But at the senior level, where advancement requires visibility and strategic relationships and a deliberate positioning of your expertise, that belief becomes a liability because excellent work that isn't strategically positioned is invisible work. Angela's work wasn't invisible, but her readiness for the next level was, and that was the gap we needed to close. So we started with a framework, and the first thing I asked Angela to do was answer two questions honestly. What skills does the GC role actually require? And which of those skills have I been deliberately building versus passively accumulating? Her answers to those two questions became the foundation of everything we did in the next 8 months. So when Angela mapped the GC role's actual skill requirements against what her current assignments were developing, the picture was uncomfortable, right? Her boss had been a good boss in many ways. He was supportive, he respected her work, and he genuinely wanted to see her succeed. Great. But he had also been running a legal department with real pressure and real deadlines. And when work needed to be done, big, heavy work like contract review, compliance questions, risk assessment, Angela was the person he turned to because she was excellent and he trusted that she would get the work done right. What he hadn't been doing and what Angela hadn't asked him to do was think deliberately about whether those assignments were building the capabilities the GC role required. He was distributing work based on who could handle it. Angela was accepting work based on who was asking. Do you see the pattern? Neither of them was wrong exactly, but together they had built a pattern that was quietly working against her. So over 4 years, Angela had become extraordinarily proficient at the execution layer of the legal function, and she had almost no experience with the strategic layer the general counsel role required. She had never led a board presentation. She had never managed a significant outside counsel relationship independently. She'd never been the primary legal voice in a major acquisition or restructuring. These are big. She had never been asked to contribute a strategic perspective on a business decision rather than a legal assessment of it. And the leadership team didn't know enough about her yet. And Angela's aha moment sounded like this. I thought saying yes to everything was how you showed you were ready. I didn't realize I was saying yes to the wrong things. That is the choosing versus chasing distinction in its most precise form. Angela had been chasing, accumulating yes after yes, assignment after assignment, believing that volume and reliability would eventually add up to readiness. What she needed to do was choose to identify the specific capabilities the GC role required and start making deliberate decisions about which assignments she accepted, which she delegated, and which she actively sought out. So that's what we did. The first thing Angela did was have a development conversation with her boss. So she came to it prepared with a clear picture of the general counsel role's requirements, an honest assessment of her current gaps, and 3 specific types of assignments she wanted to take on in the next 6 months. So she told them she wanted to lead the next board presentation on regulatory risk. Great. She asked to be the primary point of contact on their most significant outside counsel relationship. Also great. And she requested to be included in the early legal conversations on a pending acquisition rather than being brought in at the documentation stage. Her boss said yes to all 3. Why? He hadn't been withholding those opportunities deliberately. He simply hadn't thought to offer them. And she had been so reliably excellent at the work he assigned her that it never occurred to him she might want something different. Oh, that's it. People, I hear this all the time. Pay attention here. He had been managing her current role. She needed him to help develop her next one. That conversation, that single choosing moment, shifted the entire dynamic of Angela's development for the following 8 months. The assignments she took on started building toward the GC role rather than deepening her expertise in a layer the role would eventually require AI to handle anyway. But the assignment pattern was only part of what needed to change because Angela could take on every strategic assignment available to her and still be invisible to the people who would make the decision about her future, the leadership team. Doing the right work wasn't enough. The right people needed to see her doing it. Angela had started choosing her assignments deliberately. The work was getting better, more strategic, more aligned with where she was trying to go. So she was building capabilities she had never been asked to develop before, and she was doing it well. But 8 months into our engagement, she came to a session with a specific frustration. I led the board presentation on regulatory risk. It went well. The board asked great questions. I handled them. And then the meeting ended, and I went back to my desk, and nobody said anything. It was like it didn't happen. So I've heard versions of this from almost every client I've worked with at the senior level. The high stakes moment happens, goes well, and then nothing. No follow-up, no acknowledgement, no visible shift in how the leadership team sees them. And the professional wonders, was that enough? Did they notice? Does it matter? And here's the thing about that. Visibility is not a passive outcome. It's an active practice. A board presentation that goes well is an event. So what happens after the event? How you follow up, how you capture the moment, how you ensure that your contribution gets attributed to you and remembered by the people who matter, that is strategy. And Angela had been treating visibility as something that happened to her rather than something she chose to create. This is good stuff, people. This is the second form of chasing pattern, chasing recognition, waiting for the right people to notice, hoping that excellent performance in high-stakes moments will eventually accumulate into a reputation that precedes you. It feels humble, it feels professional, and it is quietly devastating to a career that depends on being seen. To be clear, people do notice, but that's a slow burn. If you have time on your side, you can build a reputation while you're doing excellent work. When you're on a timeline for a promotion, everything has to be intentional and tracked. So we built a visibility approach, a deliberate professional architecture for ensuring that Angela's best thinking and her strongest contributions were consistently visible to the people who would decide her future. It had 3 components. The first was the follow-up habit. After every significant moment, a board presentation, a leadership meeting, a strategic conversation with her skip level or the CFO, Angela sent a brief follow-up within 24 hours. Just 2 paragraphs, a summary of the key points she had contributed, one additional thought that demonstrated her perspective had continued developing after the meeting, and a clear signal that she was available to go deeper if useful. This served 2 purposes. It created a written record of her contribution, attributed to her, time-stamped, in the inboxes of the people who mattered, and it demonstrated the ability to think beyond the meeting, to continue developing a position, to follow through on a strategic idea rather than presenting it once and moving on. Take note, this was more than just communication, it was reputation architecture. The second was the strategic brief habit. So we had introduced this in session 1 as an AI-assisted practice. Once a week, 30 minutes, one significant issue facing the organization translated into a 1-page perspective memo. By this point in our engagement, Angela had been doing it for 6 months. So she had a library of thinking, a running record of her strategic perspective on regulatory developments and risk trends and business decisions that across her desk. This is about building a skill and it takes time. What we changed next was the distribution. She had been sending most of those briefs to her boss, and we widened the circle deliberately. Her skip level started receiving them with a simple note, "I've been thinking about this and wanted to share my perspective." The chief risk officer started seeing her analysis on issues that intersected their functions. The CFO received a brief, carefully chosen on a financial risk with significant legal implications. None of these were aggressive moves. None of them bypassed the appropriate hierarchy. They were professional, substantive, and entirely within Angela's purview to share, but they put her thinking in front of the people who needed to see it consistently over time in a form that was attributed to her. What was she doing? She was demonstrating value. The leadership team's perception of Angela began to shift. They could finally see her substance. The thinking that had been happening in her head and in conversations with her boss was now landing on their desks with her name on it. The third was creating a strategic ask. This is your ask statement. It is in my communication toolkit and you can download it in the description below. Angela had a habit of waiting to be included. If she wasn't explicitly invited to a meeting or conversation, she assumed it wasn't her place to be there. No, you have to ask. That assumption, rooted in the professional brand of being humble, was keeping her out of these meetings where her future was being discussed. So we changed that. Angela started making deliberate requests to be included in conversations that were relevant to her development and to her readiness for the GC role. She asked her boss to include her in his monthly meeting with the board chair. She requested to sit in on the early conversations about the pending acquisition, even in an observational capacity. She volunteered to represent the legal function in a cross-functional leadership forum that she had previously left to her boss to attend. What does the ask statement look like? I'd like to participate in these activities. How can we make that happen? You're not asking for permission. You're telling them what you want. So some of those requests were granted immediately. Some required a conversation about why. One was declined, fair enough. But this gave us important information about where she still needed to build credibility. All of them were choosing moves. Everyone replaced a passive assumption. I'll be included when I'm ready. With a deliberate decision, I'm going to engineer my own readiness by being in the rooms where it develops. By the end of month 10, Angela was no longer invisible at the strategic level. People were beginning to seek her out, right, for her perspective on business questions. The shift was gradual, and then suddenly it wasn't gradual at all. But there was still one gap, and the most important one, and it was the one Angela had been most reluctant to address. She was getting better at doing the GC role. She still wasn't fully prepared to lead the people inside it. There is a specific moment in almost every coaching engagement I've had with a client preparing for a significant promotion where we hit a wall. The moment where the client realizes the next role requires a skill that the client just hasn't developed. Maybe because nobody ever asked them to, or because they never chose to build it on their own. And for Angela, Her skip level pulled her aside after a cross-functional leadership forum and pretty much gave her some feedback. When the conversation shifted to business strategy, I noticed you went quiet. The General Counsel needs to be a voice in that room, contributing, not just a resource sharing information. And he was right. For this client, and for many of my clients, it can be a hard transition from being the person who has all the answers to being the person who asks the right questions. And that's intimidating for a very common reason. What if I'm wrong? What if I say the wrong thing? Just like my client said, I had opinions, but I didn't trust them. Fair enough. You're new to this, but we also need to work through it. This is the third and deepest form of the chasing pattern, chasing competence. Getting better and better at the skills you already have, polishing the expertise that already exists, deepening the capabilities that already work instead of choosing to develop the ones that challenge you. It's comfortable to get better at what you're already good at. It's uncomfortable to be a beginner at something the next level requires. And most high performers, particularly those who have built their identity around being excellent, will unconsciously avoid the discomfort of that beginner stage for as long as they possibly can. And Angela had been doing this. Even when she was expanding her assignments and building her visibility, she had left a gap at the center of what the GC role actually required: business strategy fluency. The role Angela wanted wasn't just a step up like the next promotion. She was going to be a member of the senior leadership team. She was going to sit at the table where business decisions got made. She would now be there to help make those decisions. She was going to need to understand financial statements, speak the language of the CFO, contribute to conversations about market positioning and organizational design and growth strategy. I mean, none of that had been in her current job description. So we made a plan. Angela identified 3 specific capability gaps: business strategy fluency, the ability to read and contribute to strategic conversations beyond legal function; financial literacy, understanding the P&L, the balance sheet, the metrics the CFO used to evaluate the health of the business; and executive communication at the board level, the specific language, posture, and presence that boardroom conversations required from a general counsel rather than from a senior attorney. Then she built a development plan around each one. For business strategy fluency, she requested a standing monthly conversation with the CFO, framed not as a legal briefing, but as a learning conversation. I'm preparing for the broader leadership role, and I want to understand how you think about the business. Would you be willing to spend 30 minutes a month helping me develop that lens? And the CFO said yes immediately. Nobody had ever asked him that before. I cannot tell you how many times that's the answer. No one ever asked me that before. I love it. For financial literacy, she enrolled in a 6-week executive finance program designed for senior leaders without financial background. She told her boss she was doing it, and she told her skip level she was doing it. She made her investment in her own development visible as evidence that she was choosing the GC role deliberately rather than waiting to be handed it. For executive communication, she did something that required the most courage of the 3. She asked her boss if she could take the lead on the next board meeting. Not just the presentation she had already handled, but the whole meeting, the complete GC agenda, his agenda. And she asked him to coach her through it rather than presenting it himself. He agreed. And he told her later that the moment she asked was the moment he knew she was ready. Not the board meeting itself, the ask, the intention behind it. She wanted this, and she was very hungry for it. Because the ask was the choosing move. It demonstrated exactly the quality the general counsel role required, and that Angela had spent months building toward: the ability to see what needed to happen, name it clearly, and step into it deliberately rather than waiting for permission. The board meeting went well. Her boss was in the room. He didn't need to intervene. And afterward, the board chair sought Angela out specifically to tell her that the legal function update had been the clearest and most strategically useful she had received in years. This is how you make impact. Remember this. Angela chose her assignments deliberately instead of accepting whatever landed on her desk. She chose to make her thinking visible instead of waiting to be noticed. And she chose to invest in the capabilities her next role required instead of perfecting the ones she already had. And here's what I want you to take from today. You don't have to wait for a performance review or a moment of crisis to ask yourself this question. You can ask it right now. Am I building my career intentionally, or am I just really good at saying yes? That's the starting point. The choosing move starts with one decision to stop waiting for the right opportunity and start building toward it. Next week, we're moving into session 3, and this is where Angela's coaching engagement shifted from developing herself to developing the people around her. There's a way to do this successfully, and I'm going to walk you through it. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. If today's video resonated with your own chasing pattern in your career, I want to hear about it in the comments below. Tell me, which of the 3 moments landed hardest for you? Because naming it out loud is always the first step to changing it. My free communication toolkit is linked in the description below, and it includes the ask statements I mentioned today. I'm Christina Holloway. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in session 3. Bye.